There is a trend spreading through Instagram and business circles right now. People are sitting in a chair facing a blank wall and doing nothing for 10 minutes. No phone, no music, no podcast, no stimulation of any kind. And then they sit down to work and focus for 2 hours straight. This sounds like productivity theater. It sounds like the kind of thing someone posts for engagement, and nobody actually does. But there is a reason it works, and the reason has been documented in neuroscience labs since 2001. What happens during those 10 minutes is not rest. It is a network switch. Your brain deactivates the system it uses to track the outside world and activates a completely different system, one that handles memory consolidation, creative problem solving, future planning, and self-reflection. And when you return to work, both systems have been recalibrated. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly what happens inside your brain during 10 minutes of nothing, why the discomfort you feel in the first 3 minutes is the mechanism working, and why your phone is destroying the one cognitive process your brain cannot perform while you are using it. This is the Dirac way. In 2001, a neuroscientist named Marcus Raichle at Washington University made a discovery the field initially rejected. He was analyzing brain scans, and he noticed that when participants stopped performing tasks and simply rested, certain brain regions did not go quiet, they got louder. The posterior cingulate cortex, the medial prefrontal cortex, the angular gyrus, the medial temporal lobes. These regions activated specifically when people stopped paying attention to the outside world. They formed a coordinated network, firing in synchrony during rest. The neuroscience community told Raichle he was looking at noise. Background, static. Artifacts? He was not. He was looking at one of the most important brain systems ever discovered. He called it the default mode network, and it has been the subject of over 8,000 published studies since. But here is what matters for this video. The default mode network does not operate alone. It operates in opposition to another system, the task-positive network, sometimes called the dorsal attention network. This is the system that activates when you focus on anything external: reading, watching, listening, working, scrolling. Any task that demands your attention on the outside world engages the task-positive network. These two networks are anticorrelated. When one goes up, the other goes down. This was established by Michael Fox and colleagues in 2005 and has been replicated across hundreds of studies. It is one of the most robust findings in human neuroimaging. When you focus outward, the default mode network suppresses. When you turn inward, the task-positive network dims. Your brain is constantly toggling between two modes: outward attention and inward processing, world and self. And here is what most people do not realize. Both modes are computational. Both modes are doing work. The task-positive network processes external information. The default mode network processes internal information, memories, plans, social understanding, creative connections, moral reasoning, and the construction of your sense of self. When you stare at a wall, you are not shutting your brain off. You are switching it to the other mode, the mode that cannot run while you are scrolling, typing, reading, or watching anything. Think about what that means for a typical day. You wake up and check your phone, task-positive network on, default mode network suppressed. You scroll through notifications, emails, messages. Task-positive network stays on. You commute, podcast in, or music, or more scrolling. Task-positive network still on. You arrive at work, screens, meetings, Slack, email. Task-positive network running continuously. You leave work, you scroll on the train, you watch something at dinner, you scroll in bed. When, in this entire day, did the default mode network run? It did not. For millions of people, the default mode network, the system responsible for memory consolidation, self-reflection, creative incubation, future planning, and moral reasoning, does not activate for a single sustained period during their entire waking day. Not because it is broken, because it never gets the chance. The task-positive network is being fed constant input from the moment the eyes open to the moment they close. The wall changes this. 10 minutes of nothing is not a break. It is the only time some people's default mode network runs at all. Now, What does the default mode network actually do during those 10 minutes? In 2012, Mary Helen Imordino Yang at the University of Southern California published a paper with a title that is itself a thesis. Rest is not idleness. She reviewed the accumulated evidence on what happens when the default mode network activates and coined a term for it: constructive internal reflection. This is not daydreaming in the casual sense. It is an active computational process. The default mode network consolidates recent experiences into long-term memory. It simulates future scenarios. It processes social and moral emotions. It integrates disconnected pieces of information into coherent narratives. And it builds the internal models that form your sense of who you are. Imordino Yang warned that constant external stimulation, the kind delivered by smartphones and social media, may be systematically undermining this process. If the default mode network never gets to run, the computations it performs never happen. Memories are not consolidated. Future plans are not simulated. Creative connections are not made. The internal narrative that constitutes your identity is not maintained. You do not feel this happening. There is no alarm that sounds when your default mode network is suppressed. It simply does not run, and the outputs it would have produced never arrive. But here is where the research gets specific about why doing nothing produces something measurable. In 2012, Benjamin Baird at the University of California, Santa Barbara, ran an experiment that directly tests the wall staring phenomenon. He gave participants creative problem-solving tasks, the unusual uses task, a validated measure of divergent thinking. Then he split them into 4 groups during an incubation period. One group did a demanding cognitive task. One group did an undemanding task that allowed mind wandering. One group rested quietly. One group had no break at all. Only one group showed significant improvement when they returned to the problems. Not the demanding task group, not the rest group, not the no-break group. The group that did the undemanding task, the one that allowed maximum mind wandering, they showed a 14.8% improvement on problems they had already been exposed to. Not a marginal effect, nearly 15% better, on problems they had already attempted and failed to solve, after doing nothing productive during the break. And here is the critical finding, the one that separates this from every productivity hack you have ever heard. The improvement was not associated with consciously thinking about the problems. Baird measured this specifically. Participants who reported more mind-wandering performed better, but participants who reported more deliberate thoughts about the task did not. The brain was solving the problems below conscious awareness during the mind-wandering itself. This is the incubation effect. It has been described anecdotally for thousands of years: Archimedes in the bath, Newton under the tree, Kekulé dreaming of the benzene ring. But Baird measured it, controlled for it, quantified it, and showed that it only occurs when the default mode network is free to run. The rest group did not improve. This is important. Doing nothing is not the same as doing an undemanding task that allows mind wandering. But staring at a wall is even better than both, because it provides the absolute minimum sensory input. The task-positive network has nothing to process. It deactivates completely. The default mode network engages without competition, and incubation runs at maximum capacity. But if this is so beneficial, why does it feel unbearable? This is where the research shifts from neuroscience to something closer to addiction pharmacology. In 2017, Adrian Ward at the University of Texas at Austin ran an experiment with nearly 800 participants. He had them take cognitive capacity tests, working memory, fluid intelligence, while their smartphones were in one of 3 locations: on the desk, face down, in their bag, or in another room. The phones were not being used. They were silent. Some were turned off. It did not matter. The mere presence of the phone reduced available cognitive capacity. The closer the phone, the worse the performance. Participants with phones on the desk scored lowest. Phones in a bag, better. Phones in another room, best. Ward called it brain drain. And his explanation is the key to understanding why the first 3 minutes of wall staring feel like torture. The process of not thinking about your phone, of actively suppressing the impulse to check it, consumes cognitive resources. Your working memory shrinks. Your fluid intelligence drops. Not because you are using the phone, because you are spending mental energy resisting it. Now extend this to every waking moment. Your brain has been trained to expect constant, rapid-fire stimulation, notifications, infinite scroll, auto-playing content. Each one delivers a small dopamine signal, not pleasure, but the prediction of reward. Over months and years of this, the dopamine receptors in your striatum downregulate. The threshold for interesting rises. Activities that once felt naturally engaging, reading, thinking, having a conversation, begin to feel flat because your reward system has been recalibrated to a frequency that moderate stimulation cannot match. This is why staring at a wall feels unbearable. Not because it is boring, because your reward system has been tuned to expect stimulation that the wall cannot provide. The discomfort you feel in the first 3 minutes is the gap between your recalibrated baseline and the actual sensory input reaching your brain. And that discomfort is not a side effect. It is the mechanism. Here is what happens minute by minute when you sit in front of a blank wall. Minutes 1 through 3, the dopamine system is searching. It expects input. It expects a notification, a headline, a visual change. The craving is acute. You feel restless. Your leg bounces. Your hand reaches for your pocket. This is the same neurological signature as the early phase of any withdrawal, not from a substance, but from a pattern of stimulation your brain has adapted to expect. Minutes 3 through 5. The acute craving begins to attenuate. The dopamine system has not received its expected signal, and the prediction error starts to decay. The restlessness does not vanish, but it softens. The urge to check your phone weakens from a demand to a suggestion. Minutes 5 through 8. The default mode network is now fully engaged. Mind wandering has begun, not random, but structured. The DMN is processing unresolved problems, integrating recent experiences, simulating future scenarios. The prefrontal cortex, which has been sustaining task-positive activation all morning, managing your email, parsing your messages, suppressing the urge to check your phone, is recovering depleted resources. Minutes 8 through 10. The system has settled. The discomfort has largely resolved. Some people report this phase as neutral. Others describe it as generative ideas arriving without being summoned, connections forming without effort. This is constructive internal reflection running at full capacity. The state Imordino Yang described, the state modern life almost never allows. By minute 10, two things have changed. First, the default mode network has performed background computation. Unresolved problems have been processed below awareness. Creative connections have been made. Memory consolidation has occurred. This is Baird's incubation effect running in real time. Second, the prefrontal cortex has recovered attentional resources that were depleted by sustained focused work. Cognitive fatigue research has documented that sustained activation of the task-positive network, the kind required by hours of screen-based work, depletes resources in the lateral prefrontal cortex. Performance deteriorates, response inhibition weakens, working memory capacity shrinks. This is not laziness, it is biological resource depletion. The 1-0 minute wall stare reverses both problems simultaneously. It runs the incubation process and recovers the attentional resources. When you return to work, you are not just rested, you are computationally ahead of where you were when you stopped. This is why the 2-hour focus window opens, not because you rested, because your brain performed two distinct operations during the 10 minutes operations that cannot occur while the task-positive network is active. Operations that require the default mode network. Operations that require the absence of external stimulation. Cal Newport, the computer science professor at Georgetown who coined the term deep work, arrived at the same conclusion from a different direction. His second rule of deep work is embrace boredom. His argument, the brain's ability to concentrate degrades when it never encounters low stimulation states. If you reach for your phone every time you feel a moment of silence, you are training your attentional system to require constant input. You are systematically destroying your capacity for sustained focus by never allowing the default mode network to run. The wall staring trend is not productivity theater, it is attentional training. It is the deliberate, timed re-engagement of a brain system that modern life has systematically suppressed. And the implications extend beyond productivity. Imordino Yang's research suggests that the default mode network is essential for the development of empathy, moral reasoning, and identity formation, particularly in adolescence. If the default mode network is chronically suppressed by constant screen engagement, the computations it performs, self-reflection, future simulation, social emotional processing may be permanently underdeveloped. The wall is not empty. Your brain is full. It has been full all day, full of inputs it never had time to process, full of problems it never had space to incubate, full of connections it never had silence to make. And this is not just about productivity, this is about cognition at the most fundamental level. Every study on the default mode network points to the same conclusion. The computations it performs, self-reflection, memory consolidation, future simulation, moral reasoning are not optional features of human cognition. They are foundational. They are the processes that make you a person with a past, a future, and a sense of who you are. When a generation spends 7+ hours a day in task-positive network activation screens, content, notifications, infinite scroll, and 0 sustained minutes in default mode activation, those foundational processes are not delayed, they are skipped. Imordino Yang's research specifically flagged adolescents as the most vulnerable population. The development of empathy, moral reasoning, and identity formation depends on default mode network activity. If that activity is chronically suppressed during the developmental window when these capacities are being built, the consequences may not be temporary, they may be structural. 10 minutes of wall staring is not a life hack. It is the minimum viable dose of default mode activation in a world that has engineered it out of existence. The 10 minutes is not the cost. It is the investment. The prefrontal resources recover, the incubation runs, the default mode network performs the computations that external attention blocks. You began this video hearing about a trend, people staring at walls. It sounded absurd. Now you understand what is actually happening. The task-positive network deactivates. The default mode network engages. Constructive internal reflection begins. Incubation processes, unresolved problems below conscious awareness. The prefrontal cortex recovers depleted attentional resources. And when the 10 minutes end, the brain returns to focused work with both systems recalibrated. The 2 hours of focus is not willpower. It is the neurological consequence of giving your brain the one thing modern life systematically denies it: 10 minutes of nothing.